All right, it's now streaming on live. Well, hello everybody who's watching. I have catching a replay or watching us on YouTube. I have Christy Lanterman today with me. She's a licensed professional counselor in Kansas. And Christy she works with religious trauma in couples, individuals. And I was very excited to talk to her because it's one of the topics I'm really interested in. And how does religious trauma affect our sexual health, right? And how does it show up in sexual relationships? And US being quite a religious country overall, I was telling Christy, well, I'm in California, we have all kinds of things happening here. And Christy, it's Kansas, and she's licensed in Kansas and Missouri. It's a little bit different world, so we can get a sense of it today and just learn more about what's happening down there, what's happening there. So yeah, Christy, what is it? What do you like? How would you define religious trauma? How would you even describe it?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and I feel it's a really important question, especially here in the Midwest. Because what I'm finding as I consult with other professionals here in the Midwest, where there's a lot more Christian faith-based mental health counseling, that there are some frameworks that define it differently. And so I love that that's the first question, because it's really important to delineate what religious trauma is. And so what the experts in the field have really talked about is how when the misuse of religious power goes too far, so we have these people in leadership, in power, of influence, of privilege, white, heterosexual, male Christian figures telling other people how they should live, behave, think, and feel about certain topics. So, as most of us know, trauma, just on a fundamental level, is when something awful happens to you and you don't have autonomy or control over changing it or influencing it. So it's a control and autonomy when something horrible happens to you.
Yeah, you just freeze and you don't have resources to process it, and you don't have maybe enough autonomy, like you said, or confidence, or that resources to go through it. So kind of this.
100%. And so then when you add religion to it, so with just regular trauma, you feel unsafe in your body or your emotions or your psyche in this world. But then you add religion to it, and now you're afraid of your eternal well-being, where the risks are so high. It's not just the life here, but it's eternity in a fiery hell. And so I'm going to listen and obey and act in a way this person in power is telling me I should act and behave, because the risks of not behaving in the right way could be eternity in a fiery hell. So very terrifying.
A lot is at stake.
A lot is at stake.
Yeah.
So religious trauma happens when these ideals, these sort of heteronormative, very privileged ways of living are sort of said, you need to live and act and behave and think and feel this way. And if you don't, you're at risk of going to hell. It's freeze in the body. And that also can stop some critical thinking. We're more likely to listen and comply with whatever it is that leadership is saying, whether it is healthy choices, healthy lifestyle or not.
And do you find that it can happen, this kind of trauma can happen at any age, or it usually happens in childhood, like other types of trauma?
It's the most severe in childhood. It's the most problematic when it starts in childhood. So Dr. Malene Winnell, she is in California, and she's trying to gain traction for the term religious trauma syndrome to be added to the DSM. And there's actually a conference on religious trauma happening in May to try and bring traction to this idea. And she says that the effect of symptoms and outcomes, like the level of how much harm that happens, is usually dependent on how early the trauma happens, how involved the family or person is within that structure, that dogmatic, fundamental, authoritarian structure. Like, were they elders? Were they service members? Did they go to, Wednesday and 2 Sunday services? Like, how involved were they? And then also, how far did the leadership abuse their power? So there's different levels of how harmful the trauma can be, based upon that length and that severity of it. And the other piece of that is, we're still trying to figure out trauma just baseline and how it affects the brain, and how 2 people can be in the same abusive, harmful situation, and somebody, ends up having PTSD, and someone turns out fairly unscathed. We still don't totally understand how that happens, but a piece of it we believe is personality, especially in religious trauma, where some people may experience the misuse of faith-based power as like a weighted blanket. It feels comfy and cozy. Just tell me how to live and behave. And if I just have a guideline and I do that, then I feel comfortable in that. And then other people experience that same type of ideals as a straitjacket, where I'm caught and I'm stuck and I feel unsafe and I feel like I can't breathe and I feel like I'm trapped, right? So we think that's partly personality, that also influences how severe the trauma can be for somebody.
And some are more sensitive, so to say, to that. And I just remember, like I said, I didn't work much with it, but I remember one case where it was like a sensitive child who would just go and just feel very anxious about doing anything because of fear of sin, and just really having that split into like good and bad, just very very split. You can see like the psyche is starting to split, like this is good, this is bad. So no complexity. We're very like what black and white thinking, and I can imagine that can prevent the growth of that critical mind, that complexity in the world, seeing the complexity of personalities, seeing our own complexity, like we're both light and dark, the shadow, the good, the bad, it's all in us. And kind of like cutting off the bad and projecting it to the outside world. That happens a lot, right? Religious books. And you mentioned like sexuality as a big piece of it. And is it mainly what people come to you with in regards to religious trauma, or like broad aspect of symptoms, and sexuality is one of them?
It's often a piece of it. And this is where it kind of splits differently in between different types of religious structures. And the religious structure that I'm most familiar with is the evangelical Christian church. So in the 80s and 90s, the evangelical church really promoted this idea of purity culture. And purity culture is this abstinent-only sex education. It's this idea that you wait until you get married, that only same-sex attraction is sinful and evil, and only heterosexual marriages are okay, and that's the only place that it's okay to have sex. And so these purity culture concepts were also taught within this religious trauma, religious abuse framework, which influenced people's ideas of themselves, their sexuality. It stunted LGBTQ identity development, because anything that was not that heteronormative nuclear family mold was considered sinful and unsafe and could lead you down a road of diseases and sinful choices and a dark lifestyle. You just
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
fear-based,
devil stuff, devil stuff.
yes, devil stuff,
Yeah.
fear-based tactics to keep people in the square, to
Mm-hmm.
behave and act a certain way. And so when you add sexuality there and purity culture there, if you are not, a cisgender male or female who is attracted to the opposite sex and wants to get married and be in a monogamous relationship the rest of your life, unless you fit that mold,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
could be opening yourself up to sin, which ultimately ends up you going to hell. So
Mm-hmm.
people's sexuality, if it didn't fit that mold, you froze in that identity.
Mm-hmm.
So one way that I've heard it described to me, which I love, Dr. Del Rey described that he's the leader of the founder of the Secular Therapy Project and Recovering from Religion. And he says that on his property, he had these sapling trees growing. And then there was a tree that broke off and fell on one and kind of bent it to the side, right? And so it's growing up and then it's bent to the side. Well, then it didn't straighten out. It just continued to grow kind of in a deformed way. And so if you could think about purity culture and religious trauma on sexual identity development, it's sort of like you're growing as you naturally should with normal desires, normal sexual feelings, normal desires to masturbate and explore your sexuality, explore your pleasure and explore your body. All of us have that. It's normal. But then when you have purity culture and religion saying that's evil and bad, and you can't experience any of that until you're married with the opposite sex, and that's your forever person only that you're supposed to have sex with, it sort of splits off this identity and you have this deformed growth. And so people's identity doesn't develop as it should.
So they basically receive this big forbiddance from exploring anything sexual, right? Because like you said, like the child at 3 or 4, they will touch themselves. Like it's a normal developmental process where they touch themselves, they experience like pleasure for the first time, they masturbate at some point. So it's very early when it stops and like sex is bad, right? This like imprint is created. So you can't so you can't even have normal sexuality as far as just enjoying it, because it's already like this bad associated with it, like this evil. And I find that like in America in general, with other religions as well, that's our is our shadow, in America. I'm not originally I'm from Belarus and more connected to like European way, and Europeans are much more like open about it. It's more secular society. So in America it's very like split off. This like sexuality is bad and evil, but then there's like so many porn sites and so many this like shadow, child pornography and this and that. So it's very like split off because it's not out in the open.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's
So
pretty.
people can experience that indoctrination, that it's developmental trauma and
Yeah.
it's identity trauma. They can experience that different ways where, and it influences parenting practices, kind of what you're talking about. So it's bad to masturbate, it's bad to self-explore, it's bad to feel any kind of pleasure in your body, especially sexually, until you're married. So as you can imagine, you can kind of split off and you can either just shut it all down and not access it all and be disconnected from your body, disconnected from your pleasure. And then all of a sudden you get married and you're supposed to be this sort of sexual fulfillment for your husband or wife. And you've never had an orgasm. You feel very much shame in touching your body. You don't know what works where, or like you were just totally blind, but you're expected to not do anything and then to do it all. And if you don't do it all in the marriage bed, then you're not fulfilling your marriage duty. So, and then we see things like vaginismus. People's, body isn't responding well because they've associated fear and sin and evil and bad to these parts of their body, and so then now they're expected to have sex, and we have things like vaginismus. We have low desire or no desire, and we have sort of this freeze mentality around sexuality when all of a sudden they're supposed to be able to explore it. And then the other split off you have is because, like, your erotic self, if it's not developed and if it's not owned, it splits off and it either dies in what I kind of just explained before, or it splits off and it just inflames, right? In secrecy, in privacy. And so then we can have sort of these out of control sexual behaviors happen because I'm not allowed to access it and masturbate and explore in a healthy way, in a way that is consensual with other people, that is honoring of our bodies and ourselves, where we're communicating and we're doing it safely. If we don't have an ability to explore that in a safe way, it still is there within us, and so it might split off and become risky, unhealthy behavior.
Yeah.
So where
it's like compulsive, like pay for sex, or again, use of pornography, or affairs, right? Or Craigslist stuff. So all that forbidden fruit that's so, it's impossible to resist when it's suppressed.
Yes. So those are the kind of two things I see. Like, it either splits off and dies, or it splits off and becomes very risky and very
do you find their tendency, just in your experience, there's difference between genders, how they deal with like, is there one gender more drawn to one way, another to another, or it's pretty like half and half?
It's a pretty mixed bag.
Mixed bag.
Mixed bag. Okay. I do. The thing that is really interesting about purity culture is that women are given a very different message than men. How they split off and deal with that is different, but the messages are very different, where women are taught that their virginity is like this precious rose and this sort of finite gift, that they're supposed to preserve their purity for God and for their future husband. And the analogy that I've heard many times is that every time you have sex, and even some really, really strict ones, every time you kiss somebody or flirt with somebody, even to that extreme, it's like you're plucking a rose petal from this finite source of sexuality that you have and is supposed to be saved for your husband. And so I do think that message kind of creates more of this freeze and die body for women, but it's not always the case. And through that, to kind of maintain that abstinence only, and that maintain your virginity and purity, there's even these traditions like purity balls, where you go with your father to a purity ball. It's very, very odd. And because you're not allowed to go to dances with boys your age, but you can go to a purity ball with the head of your household, your father, and celebrate your purity at a purity ball. And they also had these purity pledges cards, where they had women sign cards that they're committing their purity to God and to their future husband, and they will not have sex until they're married, like literally signing a card. And another one, and this is something that was actually given to me personally, is a purity ring. So at the age of 13, I'm putting on a sort of pseudo like wedding ring, where I'm committing my purity, my sexuality, my body to God or to Jesus until I'm married. So very psychologically damaging practice.
Yeah. And is it like a common practice? Like, is it widespread, like say in Kansas, or is it something more like a minority of a community that do that?
It's mainly in the evangelical Christian church where we see that purity culture, and that's all across the states.
So like in schools, it's not like, is there like sex ed at schools? Are they more open about things like that, or is it still pretty controlled with?
I can't remember the exact number of states, but the majority of states, and this is how influential Christianity is on this country and on governing practices like what we teach our kids at school. There are more states than not that still teach abstinent-only education.
Wow. So that's pretty shocking.
And I'm sorry I don't have the number off the top of my head, but there's more states that do abstinent only than there are that teach safe sex practices. Here in abstinent only, we don't talk about consent. We don't talk about protection. We don't talk about diseases. We don't talk about autonomy and our body
parts.
You know, we don't talk about any of that. All these things that are really important information to have to make healthy sexual decisions. And so
yeah, in Netherlands, I was reading some research on that, and Netherlands have started this education as early as 4 years old, just introducing the body parts, you know, in kids-friendly language. Yeah, and they have much lower rate of teenage, you know, sexual abuse and teenage pregnancies, because people kind of know what they're doing, you know.
They wait longer. Isn't that interesting? Like more often they wait longer because they know what it means and they want to do it the way that they really honor themselves.
Yeah, that's not right. So the more unconscious it is, seems like it has a counterintuitive effect, right? Because you would think like if you don't talk about it, if you like kind of put it under the rug and never mention it, pretend it doesn't exist, then kids will not be interested. But it has the opposite effect. The more forbidden it is, the more under the rug, the more unspoken, it's like creates this excitement and exploration zone for them. So it creates more interest, generates more interest, and we end up with more teenage pregnancies and abortions and all that stuff than if you don't do it.
It's exactly true. It's exactly it. Exactly how you said it. I couldn't have said it better. And so then because it's this secrecy, this desire, this taboo. And so then we go in there curious and unprepared, and then we end up having more sexually transmitted disease, more unplanned pregnancies. And then the other part where it splits off and dies because we don't talk about consent. A lot of people get into these situations where all of a sudden something non-consensually sexually is happening to them, and they don't have the vocabulary, the understanding, the autonomy or power to say no. And so then now something's happening to them. Maybe it's a leader in the church, or maybe it's, you know, or a family member or somebody non-consensually touching them, and they don't have the vocabulary to know that that's not okay. And because religion, with the misuse of religious power, promotes obedience and compliance, you don't feel like you can push back as say a young girl in the church, right? And it's also sadly really common that this happens. Sexual assaults go largely unreported for that reason, because of this abstinence only education and this misuse of religious power to promote compliance. So there's underreported sexual assaults, and then if somebody has the courage to report it, we also see religious leaders covering it up, which exasperates the trauma. Because once you have the courage to do it, what can really be healing is family, therapists, people in charge,
supporting
and making sure justice happens and the right type of repercussions and movements happen to make sure that doesn't happen again, because that restores that victim's power and autonomy, that restores their right, and then that comfort and that healing can begin. Whereas if we say, oh, no, that's probably not what happened. You're not really remembering it correctly. These details don't necessarily line up. And I mean, I'm telling you, I hear these stories in my therapy practice over and over and over again, where they got the courage to tell leadership. And then because the leadership's not trauma informed, they pick apart their stories because the details and the timelines aren't lining up. And then nothing happens to this person, the perpetrator, and they stay in a position of power and the abuse continues.
Wow, that's really sad to say and that's, yeah, and it happens, like you said, a lot of times. And then this person is lucky then to make it to your office eventually, because that's when it can really, the healing can start, right? So if we move from kind of like describing the problem and into healing, and I want to say solution, but towards like how it can heal, then it's really getting help at whatever point you realize. Like the first step is always awareness. So once you have this information, even if you like listening to this and realize that has happened to you, that's the first piece. It's awareness. It's actually acknowledging this is what actually happened, and seeking help, right? And do you find that someone, say in your area, they need to really look for someone like you who has experienced religious trauma, or they might end up with somebody like a therapist who's religious minded, who might like be, I don't know, I don't, I'm just curious whether some therapists don't have much awareness about that as well, and might twist it in a way that's even more traumatic. Not on purpose, but
yes, 100%. Well, let's hope just baseline that anyone that has a license to practice therapy can identify the symptoms of PTSD and sexual assault that can be trauma informed in a way that creates safety, stability, and healing and integration of that trauma for them. So let's just hope that that's just across.
Yeah. We'll accept it as a like assumption, good faith as an assumption.
Yeah. So typically trust that. What you can find is you can find baseline therapists are typically going to be equipped for that. And if they don't specialize in sexual assault recovery, then they will refer you to someone that they know does specialize and has the competency to do that. Where I find it can get different when you add religion there is faith-based therapists are very familiar with the research that says how religious affiliation can be a nice coping skill, and it can be correlated to positive mental health outcomes. So they are very, very familiar with that research. And so they will promote the church, they will promote religious practices, they will promote that community as a resource. Is it like as a resource for their recovery? And these folks are not aware of the other research that shows when religious abuse happens, when religion goes too far, and can become an unsafe environment, and can re-traumatize folks, and can be a trigger spot for them and maintain the PTSD symptoms. So that's where I think there's a difference and there's a gap of care for folks, at least in my area, that don't understand how religion actually can be harmful and may not be a good coping strategy for some folks.
Right, I can imagine that they would need to be aware of like the shadow side of religion, right? Of the and experience it, or sort of see it in their own line. Like if they are faith-based, I imagine they're also religious themselves. Like they have so it just takes like so much awareness to see where it affects you in your own life. It comes back to doing your own work, right? If you just really into this like, oh, born again Christian, and everything is Jesus, you just need to believe in Jesus and Jesus will save you. So it's not going to translate into that awareness about the shadow side of things with yourself or with your client, because you can only do the work to the extent that you've done it on yourself, meaning doing the work with your clients to the extent that you done in your own life.
Yes. Yeah.
So I can imagine that that's hard.
Yeah.
For some. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So do you find when people do come into this to your office, are they aware of religious trauma, or does the first step is like for you guys to build that awareness and acknowledge it? Or they will like tell you things like, oh yeah, this is just how it is, women are, just sex is bad and I don't want it, and it's okay. I live with that. Yeah, I don't have sex. I don't really need it. But my husband maybe has a problem with that, or my wife. That's where the relationship piece, right? When one partner is not happy. And do you find that sometimes you need to build awareness of what's happening?
Yeah, sometimes. I'm pretty open and vocal that I specialize in this area. And so it's more so that people see my profile and then will pick me. Oh, she understands that religion can sometimes harm. This is a safe where I can say I had a bad experience in religion. So it's more often the other case for me just because of how.
Because you say religious trauma, so people are drawn to that language. Got it.
Once in a while it comes up because for the most part, I'm more a couples therapist. And so, desire discrepancies come up a lot, and hurdles in accessing our erotic self and our sexy context come up. And so sometimes those themes of what we were taught about sexuality and what was okay and what's not okay do come up. And so I may tease it out a little bit and say, what were your earlier memories and ideas of when you first explored yourself, or what messages were given to you about sexuality when you were younger, and how was that handled in your family or your faith, and so sometimes I'll tease it out a little bit, but for the most part people are coming to me because they see it
there. Does it take a long time to change that, to come to a place of sexuality is a healthy, normal life energy, thing? Do they even make it there? I'm just curious, like how it's the process is like.
I think people can, and I think it takes. I do think it takes a lot of healing and therapy, and I think it takes being with sex positive, securely attached partners. That helps a lot too.
Yeah.
Sort of deprogramming these harmful messages in an experiential way is very helpful. So I do think that people can get there. I think that it's very deep and difficult work, and it's developmental trauma work. So you're going back and addressing these harmful messages that were coming at you when your brain was developing and your main of the world were being built, and readdressing those things, which can be really scary because it feels like, for folks, it can feel like the floor just came out from under them. Like, this is how my understanding of sexuality is. This is my understanding of what healthy lifestyle is. And now I'm deconstructing that, and I feel like I'm free falling.
Yeah.
That can be scary. And so just, it can be slow work, but it also depends on the person and their resources and the people in their lives, and how much awareness they have coming in. It depends on a lot of things.
Right. Like I can imagine environment will have a big influence, because if you're the only one in your life, right? If you have Christian friends, Christian family, if everything is confining you, the only one who starts questioning it, that might be quite different if you already had this foundation of supportive friends, sex positive friend, like you said, partner. Because a lot of times we pick our partner based on that understanding. So we might be with a partner who's also in the same confined space regarding sexuality. And if you are on your own, I can imagine that can be really hard. But if you have support, that can be quite, easier to change that.
Yes.
Yeah. So hope is definitely there for everyone. It does take time, but I said like, well, if you start working on this today, then in a year you'll go in a different place. Other than if you just avoid it and
Right.
don't look at it.
Right.
Yeah. Do you find, yeah, like you said with a partner, right? Like, do you find that some people, or like in your case, most people come and they both like on the same page, and wonder what happens when one partner is still in that paradigm, not interested in change, and one partner is actually just coming out of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a lot of regulating for the
Mm.
dyad to get there, because we a lot of times what can happen is people are deconstructing what religion taught them
Mm-hmm.
about sexuality and sexual health, and a lot of times then they're also deconstructing their faith, and
Yeah.
that's a very individual process. And so when you have a dyad doing that, a lot of times someone is 500 yards ahead of the other person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this person back here is like, where are you going? And this person up here is like, come on, catch up, I'm up here. And so
It feels good here. Come on, let's go. It's amazing. And
and
the
a
other
lot,
person is just like anxious, and like the rug has been pulled under them with the
yes,
sand. They're like just like, oh, what's happening? My whole world has just collapsed. I
e-
don't even know if there's God anymore, and all this thing.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel a lot of that is determined on that weighted blanket versus straight jacket analogy.
Mm.
So when somebody finally takes off the straight jacket and they're like, "Oh, it's okay to masturbate. Oh, it's okay to have sexual fantasies. It's okay to do kink. It's okay to like have fill in the
Neat.
blank
Mm-hmm.
sexual desires, whatever it might be, non-monogamous structures, whatever it is." So we've got somebody up here, and they're like, the straight jacket's off, and I'm flying for the first time in my life. And the person
Mm-hmm.
back here, where religion was a warm blanket, and they can understand how some of the beliefs were harmful, they're still like, I don't want to lose my warm blanket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
it feels comfy. Yeah.
yeah, and so as a couples therapist, it's constantly um, helping them regulate that dysregulation they feel in their relationship from the divide, and finding those
Mm-hmm.
areas of, we agree on these things,
Mm-hmm.
we agree that we're here now, but we're looking at going there, and
Mm-hmm.
really helping them navigate that in a safe way where both processes and both journeys of deconstruction are honored at the pace that they are, and allow
Mm-hmm.
some of that differentiation in the
Mm-hmm.
relationship to where you're still um, creating a sense of security, a secure attachment for them.
Yeah, I was gonna say the really the comforting blanket can be secure attachment. So you're not like attaching to the religion in a way, but using more like, but we're in this together. This is our journey, and I'm here with you. I'm not gonna, because they can trigger the attachment fears, right? The other one is like free. They want to do all these things. It doesn't mean they're gonna have sex now with everyone. Like it's, I can imagine they get like there's a tendency to hold on even more to the blanket because now this is unstable, right? And so creating that safe, like, no, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here. Like I'm here with you, and we're gonna
Yes,
do this together. Can be very very crucial in
yes,
couples work.
yes, very crucial. I don't know if you've heard of Jessica Fern. She's a psychotherapist and author of Polysecure.
No, I haven't.
So
I've
she
heard of it. That
talks
sounds
about
very.
how when couples move from monogamy to non-monogamy, when you remove monogamy, it exposes insecure attachment styles, because
Mm-hmm.
monogamy can be a fill-in for secure attachment, that where the
Mm.
relationship isn't actually securely attached. It's just because in monogamy, I think,
Because of
oh,
the structure. Uh-huh.
structure gives me the sense
Not
of,
going anywhere. Uh-huh.
I'm this person's everything. So that must mean I'm a pretty good person. I'm pretty happy with myself because I'm that one and forever person. Well, you remove monogamy and you have to sit with questions like, wait a minute, what does that mean about me? What does that mean
Mm.
about our relationship? what does that mean about our attachment? And I kind of feel it's a similar nice example of when you remove religion or you remove these religious purity culture concepts, what am I left with? What is healthy sexuality? What is okay? What are my values? What do I desire? Well, I don't know, because religion told me what that was. And now that's gone, and I have to figure that out. So lots of safety from the therapist, lots of safety in the relationship, lots of reassuring. And then people get to discover pieces of themselves that they were never allowed to before. And it can be so beautiful and freeing.
Well, every crisis or destabilization is an opportunity for growth, for sure, for discovering those aspects of ourselves that were not available in a confined structure. And I'm very curious about the book that you mentioned, because I've been really exploring that, like attachment styles with polyamorous, right? And how challenging it is for many people, because, well, at least most people we see, they don't have secure attachment styles.
Yes.
And so when you add, when you remove, like you said, monogamous structure, it brings up all kinds of childhood developmental trauma. So that's why it's so unsettling. And I'm yet to meet someone with secure attachment styles in that polyamory structure, but I'm very curious to meet them and finally interview and say, like, so yeah. Sounds like that book can give some answers that you mentioned.
100%. I've written 2 blogs on the book. Jessica Fern uses the acronym HEART, HEART, to identify 5 ways that you can make sure your partnership is securely attached, and also 5 ways that you can make sure you are securely attached with yourself. And so polysecure for the consensual non-monogamy community is the attachment information that has been missing the last 2 decades. So we have more than 2 very practical guidelines. We've got, all these other books, The Ethical Slut, that's kind of this how-to and sort of destigmatizing everything and being really helpfully practical, but nothing has addressed the attachment.
Yeah, right. It's exactly what I've been looking for. Because I'm like, well, nobody's talking about attachment. Oh, attachment. Right. Wow.
Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy by Jessica Fern. She also has a few free webinars on her website, jessicafern.com, about couples transitioning from monogamy to non-monogamy and staying together, and also trigger managing your triggers. She has a free episode on that too. So lots of resources there.
Very
like
cool.
You said, when you remove monogamy, it's like turning on a light switch in a basement and all the cockroaches are like scammering away.
Well, when I read that book, maybe we can talk about that book, because I would love to have a conversation about that.
I would love to.
Perfect. So yeah, then we'll look forward to that. I really would like to explore that topic with you as well, and we can wrap up for today. So much information. Thank you so much for your expertise, your knowledge. You seem like you really have a lot of experience with it and helped a lot of people with it. Continue doing so, and just raising awareness, I feel them important. And also I wish we can do something on a bigger scale. I mean, the school thing really bothers me. In California it's different, but it's pretty like distressing, and this whole pro-life thing, it's pretty intense. So just raising awareness, I think, is important. At least that's what we can do on our end, right? Educational piece.
Yeah, it really pleases me to hear you say that, because I think that's sort of where I'm at. I'm really passionate, especially here in the Midwest, to just bring awareness to it. So start talking about it more, even as mental health professionals, so we can be more prepared to screen for it and see it when it comes up in our office, and be prepared to help people through that.
Yeah, it's huge. I think awareness is huge. So just talking about it, I think it's helpful. So thank you so much. I will add some links maybe to your website and to Jessica Fern's website with the resources so people can look if they're interested in. And yeah, we'll be in touch on the conversation.
I love it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Christy.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Bye. And